season of summer. But it's also another season, in case you haven't noticed, the beginning of the presidential primary season in America. Maybe like me, you watched both of the Democratic debates this past week. I don't know if many people's minds were changed, with 10 candidates each night clamoring for attention, hoping to become better known before the primaries. Some candidates seemed to do well, and others seemed to stumble or get lost in the crowd. They were all looking to win, or at least not to lose. I'm sure that driving their intense focus was the belief that so much is at stake. The way we get things done in this country, the way we interact with other nations, and the way we have an impact, for good or ill, on our earth and its creatures. But there's no getting past it. They want to be successful. They want to become the leader of the free world. And in order to do that, they need to become popular enough to become elected. We have an interesting gospel text today that seems so contemporary, it's astonishing. As with the debates, it's full of conflict, struggles to communicate, and misunderstanding. We first hear that the Samaritans are not willing to receive Jesus. So James and John want to call down fire to destroy those people. Then Jesus responds uncharacteristically, perhaps harshly, to 3 men whose anxiety and unfinished business keep them from following him. There doesn't seem to be much comfort here for us in these challenging words. Yet we know that those of us who follow Jesus will see unpleasant times as well as comforting times. As martyred theologian Soren Kierkegaard once said, Jesus wants followers, not admirers. We know that it's not enough to sit back and simply appreciate who Jesus was and the things he did. He asks us also to be followers, disciples. And that may mean that things get messy sometimes. So here's a question for you. Have you ever said or heard someone say, that happened so smoothly it must have been meant to be? Or God must have wanted that to happen because all the obstacles just fell away. I'm sure all of us have either said something like that at some time or heard someone else say it. Now, in contrast, let's look at what's happening for Jesus in this text. Just before our reading for today, the disciple named John says, Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he does not follow with us. And Jesus replies, do not stop him, for whoever is not against you is for you. And then, as we just heard in today's text, the time of Jesus' suffering is getting closer. So he sets his face, like concrete, I guess, anyway, equally unyielding. He's on his way to Jerusalem. He won't stay in any one place for long, and maybe that irritates the Samaritans because they wanted to have him honor them with his presence for a while. So what do? They refuse to have him visit at all. And what do the disciples do? They are followers of Jesus, and they are angry at these petulant people. Filled with a newfound sense of their own power, and seeking to punish those who wouldn't receive their Lord, they eagerly volunteer to burn the Samaritans off the face of the earth. And they're also certain that they can do it. If that doesn't sound like our partisan time, I don't know what does. And Jesus, like a weary father who's driving his bickering family to an important destination, half turns around and rebukes them. It's as if he's saying, come on, guys, you don't get it. This isn't an easy day. And things aren't happening smoothly for Jesus, are they? There doesn't seem to be an undeniable sense that all this is happening as God directs. Then there are the three men who were impressed with Jesus, who want to be a part of the journey. The first one, like someone in the throes of infatuation, says, "I will follow you wherever you go." So Jesus brings a little reality into the conversation. Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, Jesus says. Can't you just imagine the man then saying to himself, "Whoa, really? I didn't sign up for homelessness and starvation. I've changed my mind. Good luck, Eddie." Then there's a second man who seems to be yearning for what Jesus is offering. So Jesus says, "Follow me." But that young man says, "Let me go and bury my father," which doesn't necessarily mean that his father has died. It may instead have been a figure of speech that meant, "Let me wait until my father has died." But Jesus is facing Jerusalem. It will take him a while to get there, and he won't be retracing his steps. Jesus' mission is urgent. Now is the time to follow. Go and proclaim the kingdom of God, he says. It is here in front of you now. And then there's one more promise. This man says, "I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my home." This man thinks he's capable of making a commitment, but he's torn. One of my seminary professors once wrote a book called "Dealing with Double-Mindedness." This man is suffering from that particular condition. He's ambivalent. He wants to go, but he's anxious about leaving his family. It will require focusing on the one who will bring him life. I just can't imagine it. So, to speak informally, Jesus is 0 for 3. He's had 3 chances, 3 swings, if you will, and he has struck out. Not one of the 3 men will join him on his long journey to the cross. So, I return to the question I asked you a while ago. Have you heard someone say, or have you yourself said, "That happened so smoothly, God must have wanted it to happen"? Now consider Jesus' experience as one way to reevaluate that question. Nothing is happening smoothly. Rarely are obstacles falling away. But I don't think that any of us would say that Jesus' mission is not what God wants. And although these little encounters might seem pretty unimportant in the big story, this is an important text. Here we read for the first time in Luke that Jesus sets his face to go to Jerusalem, where he will be killed. Before, he'd been in Galilee. This text is the hinge where everything starts to turn. And the focus is not on what we might otherwise think of as a successful life and ministry. So for a second, let's consider, what would that look like? Maybe a parade that everyone joins along the way until they get to Jerusalem. And Jesus is welcomed with open arms as he's elected King of the Jews, and the celebration continues, and he's showered with gifts and money so that he can buy a house and continue to teach as his dedicated disciples sit at his feet. And his congregation of disciples grows huge. Now that would be success as the world knows it. If that's how we evaluate what is God's will, Jesus will fall woefully short. Yet we heard at Jesus' baptism that he is God's beloved Son. He's doing what he's supposed to do. So maybe we are the ones who need to revise our idea of what a faithful life looks like. Let's look at some of the ways this lesson can help us to see what followers of Jesus should be about. First, we can think of ourselves as people on a journey. Jesus doesn't stay with the Samaritans, presumably because they would want to detain him or distract him from his mission. He doesn't wait for people to resolve their ambivalence, so they will join him in single-minded commitment. He is the rolling stone gathering no moss, but he's rolling toward a definite destination. And as a people called by Jesus, I think we can safely say that Christ Church is journeying also. Maybe you know that Greek word for church, ecclesia, that means the called out ones. We are all called out beyond our comfortable routines. As Rebecca Gaudino says in the New Proclamation commentary, there is a paradox in what Jesus is calling for. Now listen to this carefully. Standing firm in new ways that call followers to be on the move. That one is worth thinking about and pondering. So let me say it again. Jesus is calling for us to stand firm in new ways that call us to be on the move, to set our faces to journey with him. Second, I find that I am encouraged that the disciples come across as so human. They are enthusiastic, doing what they think Jesus wants them to do, and they often want to go too far. They mistake the way that people often behave for the way of the kingdom of God. They want to punish people rather than show them love and give them the freedom to make up their own minds. If Jesus loved people like these disciples, I say to myself, I can more easily believe that he loves me too. Finally, we can learn some things from the three men about how Jesus would have us live our lives. For one thing, we need to be truthful and honest with ourselves and others. It's important not to make a commitment that we won't be able to keep, either because we're naive and infatuated, or because we simply feel too divided inside. Jesus calls us to follow, but he also warns indirectly about making promises that we are unable to keep. He wants us to discern where he is calling us to stretch ourselves and say yes. He forgives us when we aren't able to go that far, but that is often where the rewards and even success lie. And that word success, what an interesting word. Let's remember that the kingdom of God doesn't look like any kind of worldly success. By the measures of our culture, Jesus wasn't successful. Most people, even his own disciples, misunderstood until the very end. During his lifetime, he didn't rack up any of the world's rewards. Money, influence, except among a very few, lasting power, or even a permanent home. He simply asked people to follow him, to love God and other people, and to be grateful for God's many blessings, which are always enough. He didn't promise that they would never feel alone or that they would always know God's will. So, here's the good news for us. When our lives, as individuals or as a congregation, don't run smoothly, when, like Jesus, we seem to strike out, and when all the obstacles don't fall away as if by magic, there is consolation in this. Those things don't indicate the presence of the kingdom of God. Surprise. No? The kingdom of God is often hidden and humble. It can seem buried under conflict, ambivalence, and misunderstanding. It's not big and grand and shiny. Looks like service. Looks like forgiveness. Looks like sacrifice. It looks, above all, like the one who sets his face to travel to a city where he will give everything he has for our sake. like love.